Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome to the Property Couch podcast. Welcome back to you too, Ben. How are you?
Oh, mate, favourite part of the week. We get to chew fat when all things property, finance, money management. Can't wait to get into what we're about today. I have no idea what we're about, but I can't wait to get into it.
Well, mate, that's for 360 episodes. You felt the same at the beginning, but you finished mate.
Hey, come on, I've prepped for a couple of them, right? Yeah, I've prepped for a couple of them. Yeah, I'm apologising in advance for this one.
That actually doesn't bode very well for me because I prepped for all of them and you prepped for none of them, and you're still best on ground most weeks.
Don't be silly. That's a ridiculous statement.
Hey, a couple of things. We are doing Q&A day today, so I want to just encourage our community to say thanks for asking questions. Ben, they're asking on SpeakPipe, they're asking on email, they're asking on socials. We see them all. They all get collated. I go through them and I try and find new ones that we haven't asked and answered before. So thank you to our contributors today. So looking forward to that. But also last week I started the shout out. I'm going to do it for the next couple of weeks, Ben, to remind our community that we have summer series coming up. It is an amazing time of the year for our community because we get to listen to people who implement our frameworks and transform what they've been doing. So I want to shout out to all of our community, thepropertycouch.com.au/my story, Ben.
My story. Got it.
And just go there, leave your details. And I said it last week, I'll say it again this week. It's your responsibility, Ben, and it's my responsibility to make sure that people feel comfortable coming and sharing, because I get it. It is not easy for everyone to go, I feel nervous, or worse, some people get in front of the decision and say, I don't think I've got anything to share here. And I can promise you that I reckon if that's niggling in the back of your mind now, you do have something to share. And just because you're having the conversation in your head all the time doesn't mean someone hasn't heard it for the first time. And what I also find, Ben, is those folks who think that they're a bit ashamed of some of the mistakes or the embarrassments that they've done, that is where the learning lives. So it's clearly about not judging where you've been, but actually sort of celebrating where you've got to.
Bryce, I can add to that by saying we also learn every time we talk to somebody. Every time there are really clear takeaways, and sometimes there's those subtle takeaways. We are by no means masters of our domain. We are still learning as well. So to think that, I've got nothing new to share, trust me, we're also learning for every experience that different households are having or individuals are having. So we'd love to have a chat, basically jump on the couch and have a chat.
Yeah, well said. Lifelong students, you and I are, Ben. If we even think back to the original summer series, remember Brendan, and he was talking about how he and his wife did Money Smart separately, to the point there was almost that invisible line down the fridge saying your food's on that side, my food's on that side. That was unique. That was, and it works. And
works for them.
But we would not have known that unless Brendan had to come on and share that story with us. So folks, here it is, the call out. We are starting to, Stiggy is sifting through all of the crew that are putting their hand up to say yes. Just a little side note here, Ben. If you're listening to this and there is an agenda, there's a commercial agenda for coming on, just letting you know, Stiggy's pretty clued up, I got to say. She doesn't say anything. We haven't heard from her for a long, long time, but I can promise you she is sharp. So she will see who's putting their hands up and why. So if you've got a commercial agenda, maybe it's not the platform for you. But if you are someone who
authentic and genuine, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. I can't say it any better. So thepropertycouch.com.au/my story. Please come and chat to us. We cannot wait to talk to you for our summer series. And also a little shout out that the Property Couch is expanding. We're looking for a copywriter, Ben, / journalist. So if that's you, someone, forward, let them know, prod them, let them know. We'll put some links in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you, because if you want to make a difference and help people like we love helping, Ben, You need to come join our team. And the final piece of housekeeping here, Ben, is a little while ago. Do you remember? I've got to really put my memory on it. It was pre-pandemic.
Yep.
You and I got in the studio.
Yep.
And we riffed our book, The Armchair Guide to Property Investing. So we kind of went through each chapter, and then at the end of so we just talked about the backstories and the little nuances of creating each of the chapters. So it's not like the audio book where we said word for word what was in the chapter. You and I riffed it and said, what about this? Remember this story? Oh, this was a bit of fun. Remember this when we were writing the book, because it was back in 2016. The reason we say that is you reminded me earlier, Ben, that we have a podcast dedicated to all of the chapters, which we will also put in the show notes. So if you're new to our community and you want to go and get behind the scenes on some of the stories behind putting that book together, you can go and do that, go and listen to it. And to make the experience better, if you go to thearmchairguide.com.au, you can go there, you can get a free copy of our book. We just ask you to pay for postage and we'll give you a free copy of the book. And then you'll have the book in front of you and you'll be able to read it and you'll be able to play along at home. So you've reminded me that was a little while ago. It was pre-pandemic, but that was a bit of fun. So it's worth our community checking out.
Yeah, I think we're over 30,000 volumes of that book out into the community. So just gives you an example of, those people who are interested in setting up structures and basically frameworks to get the $2,000 a week passive income. So if you're interested in that, check it out.
Check it out. Well reminded, Ben. Hey, my Mindset Minute theme today is entitled, Your Diet Isn't Just What You Eat, Ben. So as you get older, you realize that your diet isn't just what you eat. It is what you watch, what you read, who you follow, and who you spend your time with. So if your goal is to have a healthier mind, you have to start by removing all the junk from your diet. Pause for effect, let that land. So your diet is not just what you eat. What do you think about that, Ben? How much time do you put consciously into managing what goes into your head versus now you've just got some pretty cool filters by default that make sure you don't pollute your mind?
Yeah, look, it takes a long time, and I'm in a different stage of my life, so I'm not going to tell others basically how to do it for them. But I rarely watch commercial television. I don't watch any sort of shows around, studying human behavior when they're trying to create conflict in whatever sort of social experiment that they're trying to do. That sort of drives me nuts. I'm probably at that little latter stage of my life now and starting to read different type of content material. Like, I read Sapiens was an excellent book that I read over my my long service leave. I'd recommend.
It's on my wish list.
Yeah, if you want to see the relative nature of the world, it's obviously through one historian's opinion, but I think he's reasonably informed, and it sort of just basically gives you some sense of the construct that is our society and how we got to be where we've got to be. And it's, it can be a little bit confronting in spots. So that, and, I love data. And so I like reading stuff about, data insights, whether it's, business, property, whatever it is, health, whatever those types of things. So yeah, that's me.
Are you checking out, mate, at your stage of life? You're already sort of got the feet up on the handlebars. It's all downhill from here. Is that what you're thinking? Or
well, I'm working on a special project at the moment. So that's all I'll say. That is my passion project. So you'll learn more about that in due course. But yeah, that's where most of my headspace is at, my time is at, and it's all part of the sort of goal of financial peace and now financial contribution. So I'm working on the contribution pieces at the moment. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. So just to round out that mindset minute, I was reflecting on this. I grew up in a lower middle class family, Ben, and the diet at the time was a current affair. It was on all the time in the background, the news. And I probably built up some anxiety and some negativity. Like, if no disrespect to anyone, probably should be careful, shouldn't I? But like, it's not uplifting television is probably the point. But it was the standard diet that was going on in the background. So I was only reflecting and chatting with Andrea recently about how the fact I love that my kids don't have any news going on in the background, like no breakfast telly, no nightly news, just none. And so I think that's an important part of what this Mindset Minute theme is all about, right? Your diet is not just what you eat. So it's what you absorb, even if it's in the background, versus some of the positive alternatives that are available. And it makes a difference so that you're not breathing that anxiety. All right, Q&A day today. These ones are not SpeakPipe. These are ones that I'm going to read out today, Ben, that people have gone through our platforms to ask us the question. The first one is from Luke. Is it worth having a $700K mortgage at our age is the title for this. Here it goes. My wife and I are at crossroads. We never thought owning a home was worth it until now, and I reckon we've missed the boat. For years, my wife and I deliberated over buying a home. We traveled for work in our 20s, so renting was easier while we were on the go. By the time we settled down to have kids, one income made it almost impossible to save for a deposit. Fast forward to 15 years and we're 46 with 2 teenage kids and still renting. We have around $260,000 in super between us, plus $80,000 in savings. We're sick of seeing that $3K rent disappear from our banks each month, and we're scared of renting as we age further. So, is it worth having a $700,000 mortgage at our age? And if not, what's the best way for us to secure our future? That's from Luke. Good question there, Ben, and probably there'd be a bunch of our community who could relate to that.
Yeah, look, it's a really challenging question, right? Because what's going on in Luke's mind is that he's seeing, the stories of the day showing property prices booming and a whole consideration for what his life looks like. So let's start. I'm going to start with a sort of broad concept here, and then hopefully we can get down to some number crunching as well, just to give some dialogue around that. My first point here is don't worry about what the Joneses are doing, because what you and your family need to work out, Luke, is what floats your boat. What's the lifestyle by design that you want to create? Now, if traveling is a big part of that and not having all of the bells and whistles and all of this, the sort of the spoils of high-end things, don't worry about that. What I am saying to you, if that is important to you and having a nest egg and a financial future for life, we do need to do something now, right? We do need to basically look at your situation. So how we would go about that is spend a bit of time in terms of writing down your core values. What are the things that are important to you that give you great worth, not as in material value, but in great worth in terms of make you enjoy life and have happiness around that life. And then start to work from that position in terms of what money do we need to be able to enjoy that? Because you will come to a potential conclusion that you are right. That rental that you're paying, that $3,000, if you could substitute that for a mortgage, whereby that's then going into a longer asset, and you've got a 65, 70, that's the reality for you at 46 is you don't have a 55-year, 60-year retirement target. The funds that you've saved up, unfortunately, won't carry you through for 30 or 40 years. So you've got to make that decision around what that looks like for you. And as a family, what you're going to do as a family unit to get that. Because what we haven't learned from you, Luke, is all of those experiences, that amazing travel journey and all the things that you've done, which has made your life a rich life in terms of that. Well, now we're starting to think about the future. So if you can understand those concepts, you can now start to get yourself into a stage where you can start doing some number crunching around what's possible, Bryce.
Yeah, because it's true that time is the secret sauce, so the longer the better, but 46 is certainly not over the hill. And as you said, if the time horizon for retirement age is like it's not 55 or 60, it's more extended than that. Let's call it 65. That's at least 20 years that you have in a cycle going forward. And if it's at another 10 years, it's 30 years. That's still a long time. Yeah. So the question of, is it worth having a $700K mortgage at our age? As Ben said, it's not easy to say because we don't know what your income is, but it's probably worth thinking that if you're just having cash in the bank, you're probably losing money each and every year because of inflation, right? Cash is not returning much, whereas at least if you have a property, it's giving you a hedge against that inflation. And ultimately the goal here is to not it's not to retire on $2,000 a week, which our book is. The goal is to actually find out the number that you need to actually get what Ben said, the lifestyle by design that you're chasing. So a couple of things to think about. It's not too late at 46 if it's still your goal to get into the property market. But one of the interesting things that you've got here is $80,000 in savings. That is a phenomenal amount of cash to save. Like, ask anyone who's tried to save $20,000. It's difficult and it requires sacrifice. So you've done 4 times that, which is 80,000. So $80,000 is a lot of money to save. But then when you put it in context with purchasing property, it's not a lot of money because there's a fair bit that you need to buy. So what I would suggest is needing to be really realistic about where you can buy. Because if you're renting, chances are you're probably able to rent in a location that allows you to match your lifestyle. But the big question is, can you actually still buy in the same area for, as Ben said, like for like, the amount of rent that you're paying equals the amount of the mortgage that you'd be paying. So I thought a quick run through of the basics might be helpful here. So if you have, let's go back to the question, $700,000 that you want to buy a property, just so you have an idea in your mind in this situation how much you need. If we just do a basic 20% deposit, so the bank will lend you 80%, 700,000, 20% is $140,000. So first of all, you're going to need to kick in 140, but it doesn't stop there, because you're also going to have to get the entry cost for property, which is stamp duty and costs. So let's just do that at 5%, sometimes a little bit more, but 5%, because I don't do quick maths in my head easy, Ben. So 5% is 35,000. So if at a 5% deposit, that's another 35. So add those two together, the 140 plus the 35 means $175,000. So you need $175,000 to buy the property. But then if you've spent all your money to get into the property, that's a dangerous position to be in. So you need a buffer. So if you're 46 with teenage kids, let's just say you need a $20,000 buffer. So add all that together, the 175 plus the $20,000 buffer means you need $195,000 to buy a $700,000 property, which clearly is a bit of ways from the $80,000. So it's hard often to reconcile that I've saved all this money, Ben, but then when you put it into what does it take to buy some real estate, it's still not enough.
No, it's not. And I think that the challenge that Luke has got is got to be around just, Luke, what you've got to do. It's non-negotiable, right? Is you're going to have to start putting some money away for something. So whether you choose to put that into super or whether you choose to put that into property, it's really clear that the run rate that you're on right now is not necessarily going to build out that nest egg for a comfortable retirement. So if you looked at your opportunity, you've got effectively judgment calls and trade-offs to make here. The trade-off could be that you move to a more cheaper location and you effectively then try and buy in that cheaper location. So Bryce has used the classic 20% example. If we do, say, a $500,000 purchase, 5% cost is $25,000. You put a 10% deposit down, that's $50,000. That's a total of $75,000. You capitalize the interest on lender's mortgage insurance because you're above the 80%, and you're pretty close. And then you're in the game. And then all of a sudden your $3,000 is going off to paying off a debt over a 20 to 30 year period. And you'd be pretty comfortable in the view that property prices will increase to a point where you build up a nest egg. Now, whether it may not be your dream home, it may be a property that you buy that you add value to over time. And you may choose to sell that one to downsize or retire to a regional town or whatever to live out a quieter life, and then put the proceeds into investments and live off that passive income or into super. But the bottom line here is you need to start doing something. The clock is ticking on your retirement target, and the longer you leave it, the more situation where you see you could be working into your late 60s or early 70s. So we do want you to do something. You can go and seek advice to get a look at those numbers and those cash flows. Once you do the work on what's important to you and your wife and the kids. The alternative option, which we haven't addressed, and probably our community is saying, how come you haven't mentioned rent vesting yet? Rent vesting is a model where you live where you want to live, but ultimately you trap the difference between a very high mortgage and what you're paying as rent, and you turn that into some form of investment in acquiring, say, borderless assets and low entry level properties that you can build out cash flow on and build out that wealth over time as well. So you then try and get the best of both worlds. There is an increased risk element to that for some people. But again, the bottom line for me here is you need to get some advice around your situation. And that needs to be firstly around goals, secondly around cash flow. And that will start to tell you the story in terms of what you're prepared to trade off, what you're prepared to give up and sacrifice for the long-term benefit of you and your wife in retirement.
And look, the last thing I'll add to that is if you are in a fortunate position where the bank of mum and dad is an option for you, well, then that clearly could be another place where you could use that security to buy the $700,000 property, which means that you can keep your cash still available because you're still servicing the whole debt. And then you can demonstrate that you have some liquidity there, you have a buffer, and you can get on with life and make sure that the family member is comfortable that you can service your debts when they fall due. So
yeah, I mean they're older, aren't they, Bryce? So that's the thing. You've just got to be, you've got to make sure that the bank has an appetite for those people who might be semi-retired to be able to use that equity. But they're around, so that's where again an investment savvy mortgage broker can do that option shopping for you in terms of choices. And that's another example of where you can potentially borrow more, but have some security of your parents in behind that as well. So a good piece of advice there, Bryce.
Very good. Good question, Luke. Hopefully that's helped. And I wonder if that helped a bunch of other folks who may be able to relate to that. Next one's from John. This was on email. And the question relates to selling shares to put into an offset account. So here it goes. Hi, Bryce and Ben. Love the podcast. I've been a keen listener for a couple of years now. I've learned a lot from you guys and have recently just bought my first investment property. I also have a small amount of shares invested in the market, which I've made a capital gain on. My question is there any benefit, tax or otherwise, in selling my shares and putting the money in my offset account? For example, can I reduce my capital gains tax on my shares by moving that asset into the offset account? P.S. Go GWS. There we go.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, John. So let's start with a disclaimer first, and that is...
I was about to say exactly the same thing.
we can't give share advice, so we're not going to talk about shares. What we want to do is potentially talk in hypotheticals, right? So first things first, the capital gain, no, that's a realised event, and that would constitute income for that year. So we can speak in statements of fact. So that would constitute an income for that year, and there will be a capital gain event, which may, depending on how long you've held the asset for, have a 50% capital gains exemption. So they are statements of fact. Get your accountant to help you work out your capital gains event there. The question around offset versus shares, again, let's just talk in hypotheticals about overall returns, because we can't recommend shares over offset accounts. What we're arguing is with interest rates where they are compared to other investments that you may have, it's a question around risk profile and then about overall return. So if you have investment A and that's returning you 6% per annum and some dividends, frank dividends or whatever, income on top of that, then that might be a good place to leave your money if investment option B is only reducing interest at, say, a 2% ratio. You then can do the math in terms of where that sits. Now, of course, in some investments, let's say investment A is volatile, is your capital at risk? That's where you've got to do that judgment. But this, for me, Bryce, it alludes to what we are seeing. This next generation of investors, aspiring Australians, they are looking for alternative ways to raise their deposit, because money in a bank account has no mojo attached to it. There is not enough return for some, and they're not wanting to wait 10 or 15 years to to raise that deposit. So they are looking for alternative means for which they will invest. And that is seeing, again, statements of fact, we're seeing record inflows of money into equity markets around the world as people are looking for returns. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things about this question, I think, is the pros versus the cons. And I think in a thought bubble like this, it's like, yeah, listen to you guys. It makes sense to park all our money on offset. It's reducing the amount of interest I have to pay. Don't pay tax on it because it's a reduction of an expense, not an increase in income. So that's fine. That's the pro, right? But the con is the cost to get out of the shares is often overlooked in this discussion. And then just with the view of saving on some interest. So I think there's not much I can add to the theory that you just described in terms of it just becomes an opportunity cost discussion. But I recently had a conversation with a good mate of mine who was had done very well on a property, Ben. Bought well some time ago, grown in value. There was significant amount of equity in that particular property, and reward for backing themselves a little while ago, right? So the discussion with me was, should I sell it, free up the cash, and then recycle it into something else? So he and I had this discussion. We did a back of napkin, a few sums, and to realize that cash would have cost about $250,000 in recycle costs, Ben.
Wow.
So
yeah.
So the next investment has an enormous amount of responsibility to make that decision worthwhile, because you put the money into the next investment. It's not until you've earned the first 250 that you've just broken even. And then obviously you want it to be outperformed and have an opportunity cost. So this question for me is always around, okay, when you see the iceberg, you just see the little bit above the water, Ben, but there's a really big part of the discussion that sits below the surface of the water. And with this one, John, I can't help but sort of creating that visual around, I could see what your agenda is based on the teachings that Ben and I have as to why we should do that, but it comes at a significant cost to your net position. And I think that really is why we said at the beginning there's a disclaimer, because you need professional advice to actually get an answer to this question appropriately, because it's around your unique circumstances. But there is a bunch of layers that you need to consider. So, but Ben answered it very, very well. So good question.
Hey, Bryce, if I can have the final word on this one. I did a fireside chat with Julia Hartman for our Empower clients, and I reckon it's probably worth putting that as a bone episode at some point on this podcast, right? Because what Julia and I were really talking about was people like your friend taking action before they actually do the sums, and the tax consequences of those decisions. So it's just a little reminder for me that whenever you're sort of starting to think about making a financial transaction and there's tax consequences, you should always speak to your, investment savvy tax advisor to give you some idea in terms of the consequences, the upside and the downside, because that was the real takeaway from that chat. So we'll make sure that episode gets put up at some point. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, you raise a good point, Ben. We will put that up shortly. So if the time that you're listening to this, it's not up, it will be very, very shortly up. But if you're a couple of weeks behind, it should definitely be up. So good point there, Ben. And it's a really good discussion that you and Julia have. So that's actually a good little entree for anyone listening to this, that it's worth having a good listen to that once they get an opportunity. So no pressure, Stiggy, but Ben's just put the heat on you to put that up. So
sorry, Stiggy.
she doesn't respond on this podcast, Ben, so you're safe for a couple of minutes. Next one's from Renee. Question about when to buy a principal place of residence during your investment journey. I think it's a good one, Ben. Hey guys, I've recently found your podcast and I'm grateful for the wealth of knowledge you provide. So firstly, thank you. I have a podcast question for you. The penny has just dropped regarding what you said about obtaining negatively geared investment properties with an aim for capital growth early on, then leaning towards neutral and cash flow positive properties later on. My question is, strategically, when does buying the principal place of residence fit into that scheme? Should you invest, sell, buy, then invest with the equity? Particularly in South Sydney, where anything 3-bedroom is at least 1.5 million. I'm 25. I have an apartment in South Sydney that I'm currently living in, but could be an investment long term. I have a stable income, about 115,000, that will go up about 150K by the end of next year, which is when I will hopefully buy an investment property. Obviously, holding on to both properties would be the goal, but I'm struggling to see how I could buy a principal place of residence by 6 or 7 years' time without having to sell both. Thanks in advance. Good question, Renee. Life living in Sydney, Ben.
It's a great question. Thanks, Renee. This is the most common cash flow modelling question we do day in, day out when it comes to modelling property investment strategies. Because effectively what we're trying to do is work out where the big rock in the jar goes. So what is the importance of that big rock in the jar, and can we put investment properties prior to that or after that story? Now, in your case, Renee, depending on your future situation, if you are coupling up and you've got double incomes, that is a significant change in terms of what that situation looks like. So what we tend to do is we model both scenarios and we start to fine tune those scenarios to work out the pros and cons of each scenario. And then you finally settle on a particular scenario. Now, for those of you who want to play along at home and do this yourself, I'll talk about the technical things you just need to be considered. You need to make sure that if you're thinking about a future purchase, you need to accommodate future capital growth on that purchase and future debt on that purchase. You should also want to be putting a buffer of a 4 or 5% interest rate as a minimum in terms of doing that modelling as well. Then you get line of sight on the pros and cons of each story. So I could tell you that depending on your drive for what that big rock in the jar means, we normally work around that rock. So, it's a classic case of putting that rock in the jar. If that's the most important thing, then we put out, most of the time the customer settles on going after that rock, and they may not buy that second investment property just now. But we do everything we possibly can to hold on to that first property as part of the asset building that we're doing, the passive income that we're building. But if the big rock in the jar is such a large rock, then technically, if we've had a strong gain, then there may be a recommendation to sell out of that as your principal place of residence, cash that in because it's your own property, so you get that exemption, and then you've got a very, very significant deposit for that home, and then you can buy that property and then add future investment properties on the back end of that. But at least you've got that big rock in the jar. So this is where I keep coming back to these great questions, and that is lifestyle by design. So when you work out what's important to you, we can then make the decisions around how you execute on assets and how you use cash flow to accommodate for that lifestyle by design. You'll start to see more clarity. We turn the invisible into visible, and then you're well informed. So it really does come down for your story, Renee, in terms of how important that $1.5 million 3-bedroom property in an area that you want to live in is for you, and all of the other extenuating circumstances around partnership, family, all of those other pieces that come together. Because if that's unsolved, and you've got a 5-7 year window for that solution to come about, then holding another investment property in play for at least 5 years, we'll talk about that as being our absolute minimum holding term. It's more like 7 to 10. Then you could potentially execute on another investment property and then use both of those properties or one of those properties to divest of to get that significant rock in the jar, and then we reset to build out more properties into the future. So I've done a full 360 there, Bryce, but it just gives you the idea that it's case by case, and it all starts with your values and the lifestyle by design that you're trying to create and getting that big rock priority in the right order.
Well, lifestyle design has a bit of a tax, and that's called Sydney, because if you're having this discussion and you're in Adelaide or you're in Perth, it's different, because sure, your income's probably lower in some of those other cities than compared to Sydney, but the cost of entry into getting into real estate in those markets is less. So it's kind of why you said at the top of that response that we have a lot of these discussions each and every day with our team, because we've got a lot of Sydney clients who are in a position where the servicing required to buy a house, or even in this case, apartments in Sydney, takes an enormous amount of borrowing capacity away from the potential investor, which means it has to delay when they can buy their next one. So I think that's really important that you've said that. But what we've observed is you do have to look around the corner, don't you? Because the big rock in the jar is very expensive in Sydney, and you may be tempted to say, well, I am going to do the rent vesting model. What we've observed is it's very difficult to turn the ship once you've set its course, because that servicing is so strong, and because you need to have certain elements of equity to be able to buy the property that you may have used up in the investing program. That means it's not freed up for the principal place of residence. All come to pass when you get a certain part down the track and you go, I want to pivot. So, but I think this is a good question, and I think you've answered it well, in that this particular thing is largely a product of living in a city by design that is a world city, and it is a very, very expensive city, and therefore you do have different decisions and forks in the road that come from living in that city that often don't appear elsewhere. So good question, Renee. I reckon a lot of people have a similar question, and it's a horses for courses one, but it really does come down to getting a better understanding of what you're looking for. So good one. Let us know if that's helped, Renee. Let us know, anyone else, if you can relate to that question. The last one we got here today, Ben, is from Peter. This is around, is it better to get a loan with high interest than not buying? So hi, Bryce and Ben, love your podcast. Want to ask a quick question in regards to real estate investing. I've reached my borrowing capacity, but can do low doc loans. Would you think it's better to get a loan with a bit higher interest rate than not buying property? Regards, Peter. Oof. Mate, I'm only thinking it didn't feel that long ago that low doc loans were so part of the landscape, and it was part of the reason why a lot of people in the noughties were able to do so well in property, because they could get all these low doc loans, and all they needed to do was sign off a little thing. Yeah, I own that, I can service that, and they were able to leverage. Now, it's obviously not as common these days, but you can get them from second-tier lenders. So for me, this really comes down to an opportunity cost question again, because if you can't buy real estate versus if you can, you work out, well, what's your return if you don't, and what's your return if you do? And then you minus that, the costs of actually getting in. So for me, it feels, on face value, it feels like it's a bit like my view around lenders' mortgage insurance. Avoid it where you can, pay it when you have to. And so I'd actually just lift the template of that response to this one. Avoid it if you could, paying higher interest rate, but pay it when you have to. Because we have clients on that too, Ben, that actually do pay a higher interest rate to go interest only, when they could legitimately just go principal and interest and pay a lower interest rate. And we say, well, yes, you could, but what if you want to free up cash, keep liquidity? You might have a plan to move out of the property later, so you just want to move the offset funds around. So there is a reason why you would pay more in an environment when you could pay less. So the same applies here. Avoid it when you can, pay it when you have to. So at face value, with the question that Peter's given us here, I would say if your job was stable and your cash flow allowed and you could get into a property, well then if the alternative is not buying anything, well then and the low doc loan isn't like shark finance interest rates, I would consider it.
And I mean, I'll play the naysayer conservative response to this question, just to give that balance around, Peter, if this is for your 7th or 8th or 9th property and you tapped yourself out and all of those types of things. So that's what we don't know, right? So I'm with Bryce. When it says, it's a very small question. So we've got this clue that I've reached my borrowing capacity and can only do low doc. So if you're one of these people who is going to gear yourself to a extreme level to trying to get rich quick, then just really understand the consequences of that high debt to income ratio, and potentially that the house of cards can fall down if there is any macro prudential changes that come through. So it's about that balance. So if this is about you getting you're really confident in your cash flow, and you're really confident that you've got new income that's coming into your family. You're about to get a big promotion, or you're going to go up in a level of pay because your level of experience and expertise is going up, and you're making that as an informed decision, as opposed to making an informed decision around impatience and greed, then I would be saying be very, very careful. Because if it is a story, or you're hanging with a group of people and you all think that there's only one way for property and it's always up, you're going to be in for a rude shock at some point, and you're potentially going to take risks around that. So all I'm saying to you is it's Bryce is 100% right. It's horses for courses, assessing that opportunity cost. But if this is about you trying to gamify as hard as you possibly can, be aware that the payday can be spectacular, but the falling off the cliff can also be real for you as well, in terms of excessive leverage. And so I always say be very, very, very careful. And if it was other people's money that I'm advising on, I would always be on the more cautious side. But if you think that you've untapped the secret to greater success by rinsing and repeating on whatever strategy you're using, just be mindful that there are cycles within cycles, markets within markets, and it's not always going to be rosy. Hey, Bryce, I have noticed with these questions, one thing, there's a sense of urgency around these questions. And I get that. Like you've picked up a really nice list of questions that around this fear of missing out pieces in here. It is in these types of questions. So I really have enjoyed what we've chatted about today, just to try and put some context for people, because I get it. If you're out of the game, it's a horrible feeling. It really is. It's like every day you're seeing another story in the paper or in your news feed about property prices going bananas. But if you're in the game, you're sort of also going, whoa, this is pretty nice. Life's looking pretty good. So I get that there are two audiences that we're talking to here. So I cannot be, and stress this more importantly, that how you set up, how you prepare for whatever strategy you choose to execute on, try and make it based on goals, then cash flow. So goals, cash flow, those priorities, and then see where you can get with your journey.
Bit of wisdom in that grey hair there, Ben. Now you've ticked over the big 5-0, passing on some very timeless advice there. So Peter, hopefully that's helped you. If it's a greed play, be careful. If it's your first property, trying to get into your second, and that's your options, and there's some buffers in place, why not consider it? So good one. So Ben, I want to thank our contributors today, Luke, John, Renee, and Peter, who've reached out to us. And I want to finish with this. It's a tale of investing from a long-term property investor, from a listener of ours. The person's name's Sam, gave us some feedback on the Property Couch. Very complimentary feedback about the Property Couch, Ben, but it's the message behind it that I think is really powerful. So this is from Sam. What an amazing job you guys do. Great, well thought out and documented information. I'm 61-year-old, seasoned property investor and developer. Started in the early 90s and really stuck to the buy and hold and develop doctrine, adding further value and sell very little, enough to keep gearing and banks happy. I managed to accumulate a very substantial portfolio, all positively geared inner and middle Melbourne properties, and still continuing at even stronger levels of investment and development. It gets easier the longer you do it. It's been and still is an awesome ride. It gets more exciting the longer you stay in it. This is the 4th property cycle I am going through, and to sit back and watch literally millions added to the net worth by just being in the market is an amazing feeling. It vindicates all the hard work, all these years, the sleepless nights, the fears and the doubts, and getting to the point now of replacing all that with feelings of peace, security, and gratitude. Property investing is mainly a finance game. As most investors find, pretty soon you hit a ceiling on how much you can borrow from the banks before they start asking too many questions and impose too many conditions. It's both security and serviceability of borrowings. You need both, and it gets trickier the bigger you get. Over the years, I kept them happy and still do. Looking forward to many more years of active investing and developing. all this aside, I still love listening to you guys. You keep reinforcing and refining things I already know and practice. So I keep grinding my axe. Thank you for your great work. And to all the new investors, hang in there. It will be worth it in the end. Enjoy the ride and keep riding. How good's that been from someone who's been doing it for a little while and is actually just looking in the rear vision mirror, reflecting and sharing some of the wisdom over the years on what it's like for someone who might be new into the game?
Oh, it's obviously, very nice of you to say those kind words, Sam. We thank you very much for them. But it also shows that, proof is in taking action and continuing to, keep doing what you're doing. And so for Sam's case, it sounds like he's built it into his purpose and his passion. And I read that as someone who's in financial peace and about to hopefully go into financial contribution. So what Sam then gives back to his friends, family, community, and all of those types of things is going to be the reward for that effort that he's done. And so I'm sure that's going to bring even greater joy to him into the future as well. So all kudos to you, Sam, in terms of being able to go on that journey and continue to keep doing that. And thanks for the kind words.
And taking the time to reflect and share the learnings for the community, which is good. And as you said, very, very humbled by the kind words. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is around something that happened to me this week. I do kind of enjoy going to bed at night and just reading for a little bit, but lately I find I'm a bit more tired, so I start reading and I quickly I read too slow is the bottom line. I wish I could speed read, but I can't. And then so I figure, well, I just put something in my ears and then I drift off really quickly. So I've said this before, but I just want to be a reminder that. So what I did the other night is I got a Kindle, and I'm reading the Kindle, but I've put the same book on audio book as well. And I've pumped it up. I pumped it up to 1.25. So I'm ripping through it a bit quicker, but it's like the pacing car. So it keeps me going at the right pace. So
it's good. I like it.
It's a little hack that I've got just so that I can put something in my mind just before I go to bed and sort of hack the fact that I'm tired, and I'll nod off if I just listen to it on my own. But there is a caveat on this, Ben.
What's that?
Andrea was also reading a magazine at the time, and it was because we're going through the design. So every single page was, oh, have a look at this facade. Oh, look what they've done here. so the caveat is you need to make sure that you're not going to get easily distracted, because when you're at 1.25 and you're trying to quickly push pause on the audible and then you don't lose your spot, it's a finely tuned machine.
As you know, we've talked about this before, but I'm a big audiobook person, and so when I love a book, I then buy it, and if I want to refresh a certain chapter or whatever, I do exactly that, because I'm not the world's best reader, as you know. So I like to basically have the book, and I do exactly that. 1.75. I'm just trying to rip through the chapter with someone else reading it to me, because I reckon it just lands a little bit better for me than when I'm reading it just on its own.
Because it's like you're listening to someone who's really good.
Correct.
Too. And
I agree.
And it's in those momentary transitional periods that we have in our life when, to be honest, I just talked about it going to bed, so that's not a transitional period. But it's usually, I've said this before, but I'm putting the bins out, or I'm doing the dishes, or I'm doing something else. It's those transitionary periods where I just put something in my head and I can knock off a chapter or something, because we all would love that time on a Sunday, Ben, when we sit on the couch and the sun is beaming on our face and there's no kids at our feet and we can sit there and smell. But in my world, that never happens, right? So it's these transitional periods where you get an opportunity.
And knowledge breeds more curiosity for more knowledge, right? So that's the thing that I've, really enjoyed over the last sort of decade now, is that I just have a lot more curiosity about a lot more different things. And there's so much great content out there that you want to absorb to get some level of view, still not expertise or, deeply informed view, but you're still trying to get an understanding, right? And that's on things you think you understand, but it's also on things that you think, geez, I'm not quite sure what that person's thinking with that approach. You don't just say, well, they're crazy. You just got to go and find out why they're thinking what they're thinking. So I think from that point of view, it's a good lesson for all of us in terms of, the centralist approach to the world and how we look at things is really helpful. So I think there's something in that. So, mate, well done, well said, and I like that life hack.
Mate, what's making property news?
Well, mate, I thought we'll just talk about where to for property prices. I mean, I know, we'll probably do more work on this before the end of the year, but I just wanted to take a temperature test on what's happening in the space, right? So we do know that there's record commencements and beginnings of approval. So we saw some articles coming out around that. So there was an article recently around basically housing starts soar on home builder. So we're seeing all of that preparation now turning into construction coming out of the ground. So that's good for jobs and the economy overall. So that's one piece of the equation, but also this opening up. So I just probably was interested in your thoughts around where you think demand will go. I know I'll start the conversation off. I think, I saw some forecasts from Bill Evans early this week. Big fan of Bill's. I think they're relatively conservative in terms of how much more this cycle's got to go in it. Because all I'm doing is making sure that I'm looking at the demand supply story. And obviously, our chief research person, Jeremy Shepherd's doing all that great work behind the scenes. We're getting feedback in terms of what's happening in that area. Location score, DSR data, all of those platforms that we're using are working really, really well. And mate, there is, the demand is real. It is there. So even though firsties have basically, they're the home builder, they've taken advantage of that, I still see upgraders as playing a role, and I still see, investors coming into the playground. So when we get into the new year, I'm sure people are going to say, what's this year going to look like? Well, I think how this year is going to end is probably going to be a really positive story. I mean, I'm privy enough to get the weekly results coming through from CoreLogic in terms of price growth in each market and each capital city. And so the story I'm trying to tell here is, I think you're still going to see a lot of toppy stories about a booming property market. And I think that is going to play out for the remainder of the year as we open up. What are you seeing in terms of listings and what the team on the ground are getting?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, but I think what I'm trying to assess is, I know what the demand is at the level of our buying team. So I know there is surplus demand. I know that to be true. And what I also know is that we're buying in multiple markets across the country, and the amount of listing story is the same across all of them. And then throw into the mix, not only is we low supply, high demand, but then you've got desperate people doing desperate things that mean that there is no precedent in a particular market for a price, despite the fact that there's 6 or 7 or 8 or 12 people that are all fighting for the same property, and the person who bought it was only $1,000 more. And yet the valuer is saying, I can't stack that property up at that price because none of the stuff that's happened in the last 60 days is on the public record. So therefore, I'm still valuing stuff 65 days ago, and there's no justification for this price. But So I agree that there is still no sign of a shortage of price growth given those conditions. And so therefore, the price point that we're playing at an investment grade price point, I still see that there's still some legs to go in that. So obviously at the top end, where the market has moved the properties to the ceiling based just on borrowing capacity, that is clearly going to have some impact, around that $1.5 million plus. But up to investment grade 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, I still agree with you. So therefore, the only thing that's changing for me on that demand place is because demand is largely around household size, your ability to pay, and population growth, right? So if the population growth will come, the household size is getting smaller. We're on limited listings anyway, so it's really around that ability to pay. If the banks drop the hammer and make it harder to get the money, that's the only way I can see it really making a material impact on the demand side, because we're playing in a game with Fortress Australia where no one's coming onto the shores at the moment anyway. So wait till those gates open up again.
Well, so on two fronts, I mean, we know that they come in and rent first, right? So I think if we do see in the next 12 to 18 months a price softening, rents are absolutely going to kick in. So yields are going to be the story that plays into that space. So I'm again, biased towards property, but I'm still really bullish about where the property story is for at least the next 2 to 3 years. So for those people who do think that, have I missed out on what I should do? I'm telling those people, hey, the best time to invest in property was yesterday. The second best time to invest is when your cash flow allows it and your planning is in play for that to happen. And tell us about the special guest that we're also, we'll have on next week, mate. Or we'll keep it a surprise. Well, we've got a property economist coming on next week.
In a couple of weeks' time, mate, we definitely do. So, but we will keep our powder dry on that. Other than to say, it's going to be worth sticking around. We've got some really great questions. So,
awesome.
Perfect opportunity, Ben, for anyone who's made it this far in our podcast to go to SpeakPipe and leave a question. What would you like to ask around a very senior economist, first time guest on the Property Couch? What's the sort of questions that you want us to ask her?
Yeah, love it.
So we can help you out. But good sort of workshopping there, Ben. I think it's interesting. We are going to tackle that rapid price growth in an upcoming podcast when you and I can actually get together and put some time into that, because I think it's a really important one. So
I agree.
Very good. All right, big episode, Ben. Q&A day, lots going on there. Again, thanks to all those contributors. And thanks to you too, mate. So until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Well said. See you next week, mates.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1. Because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, you will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you, because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management, so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. To thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up right away.